All right, if everybody can find a seat and we can get the presentation started for tonight. Okay, well, thank you everybody for showing up tonight. I think we have some great information to share with the public. For the agenda tonight, we're going to have a presentation on the recovery plan for Paradise Irrigation District. And then after that, the Department of Water Resources Division of Drinking Water has requested to give a presentation to the public on their drinking water standards that were issued a couple weeks ago. So after that, then they will be up and we'll have time for question and answer during both presentations. So at this time, I'm gonna give a few shout outs. We have folks from Southern California here with us today that are here helping us through our recovery plan. You might have seen them out there on the streets. But the district has decided, with the complexity of the issue and how the recovery plan is constantly needing to be changed, that we're using water experts within our own organizations out there through a mutual aid contract to help us get through this. And so I would like to say thank you right here, up here in the blue shirts, to Rancho California Water District for helping support the district through this process. We've also had folks from Cal Water Chico up. We've had folks from San Francisco Water and Power and East Bay Mud up helping us through this process. And this is going to continue on through this recovery process. We have people from Cobb coming in the next couple weeks, and then also from Southern California with Helix Water District and Padre Dam. And it's just going to continue on, and it's been such a great blessing for us to have them here. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Sammy to get us updated on the recovery plan.
All right, I'm Sammy. Whoa, that's pretty loud. I'm Sammy Cater with Waterworks Engineers. I see a lot of familiar faces out there. I've been here for a couple of these public meetings and also for the PID board meetings, and it's good to see you all. So tonight we're going to update the water supply recovery program. So the last community meeting was about 2 months ago. We were here on May 14th. We presented the recovery plan. We presented the data that was available at that time. We discussed the conditions for and the steps to lift the water quality advisory on individual service laterals. Since then, over the last 2 months, we've more than doubled the amount of testing that's been done in the system, and we'll talk about that testing and the results and what we're seeing. We've reported those findings at the PID board meeting in mid-June, so we've been trying to report as often as we can in public forums. And we've found enough clean parts of the system to begin lifting the water quality advisory at some service laterals. And we'll talk about that in some detail as well and what that means. So last time we were here in May, we had sampled 724 sites, roughly, as of the end of May, or as of the beginning of May. About half of those samples were destroyed structure samples. We had sampled 101 water mains and 81 standing structures at that time, and started to see some patterns in the data that led us to really focus our efforts going forward. So if you look at what's been sampled through now, we're up to almost 1,800 sites that have been sampled. And those 1,800 sites include 624 water main samples and 285 standing structure samples. So we've really focused on water mains and standing structures over the last 2 months in the sampling, and that's in an effort to look at being able to lift the water quality advisory in certain sections of the system. We feel like we have enough data on the destroyed structures to make some conclusions about how to handle those going forward, and again, we'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation, so we haven't been as focused on destroyed structures. How was this accomplished? PID staff continue to work tirelessly on this program, and I think you can all be really proud of what they're doing for you. There's been a lot of community cooperation. You guys remember last time I was here, I said, hey, if you can live without water for 2 weeks, we're going to try to do these mass samplings, and a lot of people found a way to do that, and that helped a lot in our ability to get a lot more samples taken and get a lot more information, and we appreciate that. And then mutual aid efforts. So East Bay Municipal Utilities District was here, San Francisco Water Department was here, and then we continue to have this ongoing help from our mutual aid partners like Rancho California to provide the skilled and talented labor that it takes to do this sampling effectively. A little bit about how the data is being managed. So for those 1,800 samples which have been taken, over 125,000 water quality tests have been performed at various labs. And we've worked to standardize the analyte list and test methods. We've moved to electronic data deliverables from the lab so we can manage that massive amount of data. All of that data goes to a single data warehouse, electronic warehouse, and then that's used to develop the statistics that I'm talking about tonight. We use it for our analysis when we're looking at lifting the water quality advisory. And it's the exact data that is used to produce the maps that are on the recovery website, those GIS maps. They're all coming from the same data source so that it's all real-time data and it's all the actual data that's coming from the labs. Where can you see the data? I hope that many, if not all of you, are familiar with this website, pidwater.com/recovery. If you go to that website, you'll get a page that looks like, next slide, this. On that recovery site, there are 3 different maps, right? There's the service lateral sampling map, there's the mainline sampling map, and there's the water advisory lifted map. And each one of those shows the data that's in the title. And again, this is all real-time data that's linked to the database that's fed directly from the laboratories. So this isn't like graphics we produce every now and then to show you. This is all actual data that's being produced. If you go to the next slide. So this is the all service lateral samples. If you go to the website, that's what you're going to see. I wanted to mention, this is actually a fairly functional geographic information system website. There are a lot of ways that you, as the user, can filter this data and examine this data. And for anybody who really wants to get into working the data, please contact me, and I'd be happy to set up a training or a demonstration about how this works outside of just, it should be fairly straightforward to look at it, zoom, find a location you're interested in, click on the dot, and get the data for that location. But you can also do a lot of data manipulation and filtering and things like that that might be of interest to some people. And if that is of interest, please let me know. So using those kind of filters, the next slide is looking at just the service lateral samples filtered for standing structures only. So if we look at that standing structure data, and you sort of squint at it, right? There's a fair amount of red on there, more than last time. So that's concerning, obviously, and we're going to talk about those red dots and where they come from. The next slide shows service lateral samples filtered for destroyed structures only, the burn lots only. And this looks really similar to last time. About 30% of the system that have a burned lot, 30% of the service laterals which serve burned lots are not meeting the MCL for one of the VOCs of concern, benzene or something similar. That's been fairly consistent. Next slide. Okay, so this is back in May, right? So we looked at 96% of the standing structure laterals met the MCL for everything. 70% of the burned lot laterals met the MCL, meaning 30% of the burned lot laterals did not. And then 96% of the mains tested met the MCL. Next. This is the data as of the end of June. The data for the burned structures and the water mains looks very similar. Again, around 70% of the burned lots meet the MCL, meaning 30% do not. And 97% of the water mains tested meet all regulations. The one thing that's different, like we talked about with the map, that seemed like it had a lot of red dots on it, is that the standing structure service laterals, we're seeing only 74% that meet the MCL for all constituents. So when we started seeing that data come in, we were quite concerned. And we have started to look at what we're seeing and where we think that's coming from. Next slide. So why is it looking worse? Methylene chloride. So I think this is probably something that started to be the second chemical you thought you'd never know the name of, right? So benzene was the first one, and now everybody knows what benzene is. And now methylene chloride gets to be the second one, because I think there's been a lot of talk about methylene chloride. It's also known as dichloromethane, or DCM, same chemical. It has been the only MCL violation, which means dichloromethane over 5 micrograms per liter. It has a different MCL than benzene does. The MCL for DCM is 5. At 60 standing structures, it's been the only violation. So we see that and wanted to look into it more. It's a compound that's related to chloroform. So in a distribution system that's disinfected with chlorine, which are most of the country, including Paradise, chloroform, which is also called trichloromethane, and bromodichloromethane are both what are called disinfection byproducts. And they're in everybody's drinking water that has a chlorinated system throughout the country. There are regulatory limits for them, and they've always been in the drinking water. And they generally occur at below regulated levels. And what we're seeing in all of the sampling we're doing in Paradise, which now will be, I think, the most sampled system for these disinfection byproducts, we're seeing below half of the MCL levels generally for chloroform and BDCM. The chemistry here is just to connect the two. Dichloromethane is related to these chemicals that have always been in the water and are still in the water. Next. Okay, so if we take that current data and instead of looking at any MCL violation, we look at MCL violations for anything other than methylene chloride. We see we're back up in the 95% compliance region with the standing structures. So that methylene chloride issue is the difference between what we talked about in May and what we're seeing now. Those 59 locations where we tested a standing structure and we had an MCL violation for dichloromethane and nothing else represent that difference between 74% and 95%. Next. So where's it coming from? So we've spent the last month working towards an answer to this question, knowing that that would be, because it's the right question to ask. Our strong suspicion at this point is that in many, not all cases, but many cases, we are getting the DCM forming in the sample manifolds that we're using for sampling. So when we go to sample a site, we have a sample manifold, and I'll show you a picture in a minute, and our suspicion is that we're getting DCM forming, or methylene chloride forming in those sample manifolds. So what evidence do we have for that besides just, it seems like that's what might be happening? So the first bit of evidence is we didn't start seeing dichloromethane in our sample analysis results until we started these two large sampling events, the one with East Bay Mud and the one with SFPUC. And when we did those two big events, we started to see these dichloromethane hits. And we hadn't seen them before. And then even in between those two events, there were a group of samples taken using a different sampling manifold, and we got no hits for DCM during that time period. There have been almost no main samples with DCM. So all the samples we've had with methylene chloride or DCM have been from the service lateral, where we're using that manifold to sample the service lateral and it's the biggest opportunity for the water in that manifold to be a part of the sample that's taken. We looked at laboratory contamination. That was something that was suspected and discussed early. So we took about 20 of the samples we had taken that were positive for methylene chloride. When they take the samples, they take a volume of water, but they don't use all of that when they test it, and they keep it in the lab. So we called the lab and said, hey, for these 20 samples, can you rerun them out of the same water that was sampled to see if we have some issue with that sampling run. And when we did that, they tested positive for methylene chloride again at the same levels. So we don't think it's a lab contamination problem. Like I said, samples that were taken using a different sample manifold setup were free of DCM. And then we took some sample manifolds and we just filled them with system water that has chloroform in it and has BDCM in it, and we let them sit for 72 hours, and then we sampled those by themselves. They weren't connected to any service lateral. And when we did that, we got dichloromethane in those sample manifolds. So that was another piece of evidence that we think there was an issue with the dichloromethane, forming in the sample manifold. Next slide. So how is it forming? What we believe is happening is right now when we sample, that's an example of the sampling manifold up there. And you can see the brass valve with the blue tag on it. That's the curb stop. So on the bottom side of that valve would be the PID system. And right now when we go to isolate the system, we connect that to the curb stop. We close those two valves on top, and we let it sit for 72 hours minimum, and then we take sample. And our suspicion is that something in that sampling manifold over that time period is reacting with the chloroform and the BDCM that are in the water and forming dichloromethane, which is a degradant of trichloromethane. So it goes from trichloro to dichloro. That's our suspicion. Next slide. So what are we doing about this? So first of all, we've identified an issue with our sampling protocol, so we're modifying our sampling protocol. We are isolating the service lateral at the curb stop, making sure that that valve is closed. The reason that that wasn't the approach from the beginning is it is fairly frequent that that curb stop has a small leak. And so getting the manifolds isolated at the curb stop is easy to say in a presentation or write in a plan, but when you're arms deep in a meter box, it's not quite as simple. But we are doing our best to isolate the service lateral at the curb stop and leave that sample manifold dry. And then we're going to use that new protocol and see what we get in terms of DCM results. Our hope is that the DCM contamination hits go away because it was due to our sampling approach. We are in the midst of making these changes and running things through the lab and seeing what we get, and we'll report that to you when we have the data for it. Once we've gotten to a point where we are satisfied that we have a sampling protocol that more accurately represents the water that's in the service lateral, we will resample all of the standing structures that have MCL violations for dichloromethane using that modified protocol. Until then, we're not clearing those. This isn't true for every occurrence of methylene chloride, but it is true for a lot of them. And those 59 samples that I showed that just had methylene chloride and nothing else in the water, our suspicion is that this is an issue with the sample manifold, not an issue with the service lateral. Next slide. Okay, so we started lifting the water quality advisory in various places. And I wanted to talk a little bit tonight. I talked about this at the PID board meeting, but talk a little bit about the conditions under which we are lifting that water quality advisory. So on June 8th, we produced a memo and worked with PID staff and waterworks engineers, and we produced this memo that documented the conditions under which we would lift the water quality advisory. And a quick summary of it is that, first of all, the sample that we take for that service lateral has to meet all regulatory requirements. Second, the main in the street which serves that lateral has to be sampled, and it has to meet all regulatory requirements. And third, it has to be a part of a network of mains in the system which are connected all the way to the water treatment plant. They've been tested, they meet all regulatory requirements, and are non-detect for benzene. Not just the 1 microgram per liter limit, but non-detect for benzene. So those are the criteria that we establish in order to lift the advisory on a location. Next slide. So using that criteria, and again, this is the third map that's available on the PID recovery website. The green dots are the main samples that have been taken, and all the lines on there are the water lines in the distribution system. The blue lines are the ones that we have lifted the advisory on based on our criteria, and the gray lines are the ones we haven't yet. So you can kind of see, next slide, if you just look at the mains, that we have this kind of core of mains that we've been able to test and satisfy ourselves are regulatorily compliant. And the gray lines on there tend to be, sort of the capillaries, the small pipes, smaller mains that branch off of these large mains that go down Clark and Pence and Skyway and across town to connect them. So those gray lines we haven't tested yet and don't have enough information to say that they're cleared or not cleared. But we have cleared all of the blue lines. And again, you can look at this any day on the PID recovery website, and it's updated. As soon as we clear a main, it shows blue up there. So that has resulted in these services having the advisory lifted. So that's the third map that's available on PID's website. It shows every service where the water quality advisory has been lifted. Right now, there's a fair number. Next slide. So we have, of the 172 miles, almost 1 million feet of distribution main and PID system, we have tested and cleared 89 miles. And there's still 83 miles yet to go. So all those little branches and dead-end streets and that kind of thing make up almost half the system. But the half that we've cleared is that core of the system. And based on those line clearings and individual tests taken at houses, we've issued there are 94 locations which either have or will have shortly letters issued of water quality advisory lifted. And if you go on the website, those 94, can you back up a slide? Those are the 94 that have been lifted. So, thanks. That's nice. Thank you. All right. There's a lot of people in this room who worked really hard to make that happen, so they appreciate that applause too. So one thing to remember about the letters when we lift the water quality advisory, each letter is only for that address. That might seem obvious, but just to point that out. It states that the tests indicate that the water in both the PID service lateral and the water main at that location and the network of mains which serve it are compliant with all regulatory standards. It lifts the water quality advisory for that service lateral. It advises that the customer side plumbing is the customer's responsibility. We'll talk about that a little bit. And it also advises vigilance. What about the customer side of the meter? So guidance for testing the customer side plumbing has been issued by the State Water Resources Control Board Division of Drinking Water. There's a URL there where that advice document is located. You can also, there's a link to that document on PID's website. And there's some fine folks from the Division of Drinking Water here tonight who will discuss that a bit further when I'm done. What happens when we do have contamination? Because not every one of those tests came up clean, right? And we are sampling some standing structures that have benzene and have contamination problems. In the mains, generally speaking, when we've seen contamination, it's been in small diameter mains, meaning under 6-inch, 4, 3, 2-inch mains that go down a small street, and generally on a dead end. At that point, the first step is to flush and retest and see if we can get some better results by flushing. If that doesn't work, then the plan will be to replace those mains. On standing structure service laterals, which don't meet the MCL, the plan is to replace them with a new service lateral. Burn structure service laterals are a little bit of a different story. I'm going to talk about those a little bit. So, we have a 9,100 or so burned lots. We wrote an update to the recovery plan, which summarized all this data that's being presented tonight, and took a look at 3 different alternatives for dealing with those burned lots. Right now, like I talked about before, as we've tested the service laterals going to the burned lots, it's been pretty consistently 31% of those have not met the MCL, not met regulatory requirements. 54% of the time we're seeing detections for VOCs other than TTHM, the disinfection byproducts. We looked at 3 approaches. The first approach would be to test all 9,100 of those service laterals and only replace the damaged ones. And that would take 2.5 to 4 years, roughly, something like that. The second approach would be to replace all of the laterals and meters as the community rebuilds using PID staff. The third approach would be to replace all of the laterals and meters over a 3 to 5 year window with outside contractors. Next slide. So this graph is a graphical representation of those 3 approaches. The red line is looking at testing each lateral and only replacing the ones that are damaged. And the reason the red line has a slope is because the more damage there is, the more expensive that will be. So there's a range of cost. At 30%, we estimate the cost would be about $24 million to do that, if we continue to see that 30% damage. The blue line is the cost to replace all of the laterals using laterals and meters using PID staff as the community rebuilds in response to demand from the community. And we estimate that to be around $26.9, $27 million. It's not too much more expensive than to test and only replace the damaged laterals. And then to replace everything in the system, laterals and meters, using outside contractors, we estimated around $33 million. So it's more expensive to use those outside contractors, especially right now. I think you can all appreciate the cost of construction in Paradise is probably the highest it's ever been, or maybe ever will be, right? So, next slide. This is looking at those same 3 options in a table. And this work is all being done in our discussions with our partners at FEMA about how to approach the recovery of the system for the burned lots. The approach that PID is advocating is approach 2, that we would replace every service lateral that serves a burned lot in the system at the time that it's needed by the community, by the customer who owns that lot. And that will happen in response to whatever the pace is of rebuild, and it would cost just a little bit more than the test and only replace the damaged laterals. And we'll have a significant higher degree of public confidence in the system. And so this is the discussions we're having with FEMA, and those are ongoing. And again, we will report as those discussions continue and we see if they agree with our proposed approach. Next. So with that approach, right now, how is PID supporting rebuilding? So we're taking data on issued building permits. It's being continually shared with us by the town. When a building permit is issued, then PID will confirm if the water quality advisory has been lifted on the main which serves that lot. If it hasn't, we'll test that main. So we've got more than half of the system tested, but if the building permit was issued on a lot that's in one of those little dead-end branches or, that we haven't tested yet, we'll go test that main at a hydrant or a blow-off or something like that. That service lateral will be replaced by PID. The goal would be to replace it prior to the home builder having a final inspection for that house. And this has already been happening on several local rebuilds in support of those rebuilds, replacing those mains, those service laterals. Another question that comes up is, what about retesting? In our letter to the public, we advise vigilance. And if you notice a change in water quality, please let PID know. But we're not just relying on that. Retesting of the mains in the system will occur at the zone breaks. So everyone, I think, may be familiar with the zones. And there's water that flows from zone to zone, from A to B to C and so forth. In those zone breaks, where the pipes cross over between zones, that's where we're going to sample, because those are places where all of the water comes together and then goes back out. So it gives us some good locations to take samples and have samples of the water in the entire system. So testing on the zone breaks will happen monthly starting next month for the first year, then quarterly for 2 years, and then annually thereafter. Just to kind of make sure that something doesn't come up as we go forward, and that we continue to see those kind of good results in the main distribution system. We also are going to retest anytime that there's a local depressurization. So last time I was here, I think a lot of you were here, and we talked a lot about what are the risks of having all of these burned lots with potentially contaminated service laterals in the system as we go forward for the next several years of rebuilding and replacing those service laterals. And the potential for depressurization to pull contaminated water in the system was something we identified as a possible risk. And so when that happens, when there's a depressurization, which generally would be a leak and leak repair or some kind of construction, when that system is repressurized, then that area will be retested, just to confirm that we didn't pull any contamination into that main. And then the last bit is that we will be testing service laterals for a while now as we go through and test all of those standing structures. I mean, it's great that we've got 94 cleared, but there's 1,300 plus that are standing, right? So we still have a lot of work ahead of us. And as we test those service laterals, every time we do, we're testing the associated main that's in front of that house. And so we will continue to take main samples that way also over the next year as we test those service laterals. Next slide. Next slide. Oh, that was? Oh, sorry. Oh, you were ahead of me. Okay, how long will it take to sample the remaining standing structures, and how will it be done? Okay, so we have this core network of water mains that we've tested and cleared, and this will allow us to more quickly clear properties laterals as we test them. Each test still is going to require a 5-day shutdown window. So last time I was up here, I asked for 2 weeks. Today I'm saying 5 days. The 5-day shutdown window at the meter helps us achieve that 72-hour stagnation period that we're using. We're going to divide this up into 2 groups. So one group would be a weekdays only group, where those 5 days would occur during a Monday through Friday. And the other one would be including the weekend group, where those 5 days would occur between Thursday and Monday. So those are the 2 groups. Next. So then we're asking people to sign up for sampling of their standing structure, call PID or stop in the lobby, indicate whether you want to have your shutdown on the weekdays only or including the weekend. If you've already requested sampling, we will contact you to determine your sampling preference. You're welcome to ask again, but I don't want you to get frustrated that we've already asked, we're already on a list, why do we have to keep asking? We will contact the people who have already contacted us that we haven't sampled, and we'll ask which of those kind of windows work for you. When we go to resample the locations that tested positive for dichloromethane, we will also contact you and say, okay, we're looking for a 5-day window to resample your site, help us whether weekends or weekdays work. So once we get information about that from customers, then we're going to group those so we can be efficient about the sampling work that we're doing. And then we'll call you back and say, hey, we're going to sample your site during this week, the week of July 22nd. And we'll give you a window. And hopefully you'll say, sounds good, let's do it. And we'll have you on that list and we'll sample you during that week. If it's not good, you can say, you know what, I know I said weekdays, but that particular week just doesn't work for me. And we'll take you off of that list and we'll try again. We'll put you on another list and we'll put you in another route and we'll call you back within a few weeks or the next time we can get to you and try to put you back on a list. So we're going to try to do this where we can accommodate everyone's personal schedules, but still have the time we need to properly take the samples. The goal here is that we will sample about 30 to 40 standing structures per week, and we'll keep on doing that till we're done. Next slide. That's it. That's my last slide. I guess I must be done. Thank you. So I'm going to introduce Bruce Mackler with the Division of Drinking Water, and he can tell you a little bit about himself. Oh yeah, we could take some questions if you'd like. So there's a microphone here. You're going to set it there. Why don't we, or maybe you want to bring it around to people? You want to just take it off the stand and bring it to people, or you want them to line up?
Hi, Sammy. A quick question. I have a history working with dichlor and trichlor, being an IBM engineer. What are you using to clear out these valves after they're contaminated?
Clear out the manifolds?
Yes.
So we are flushing the manifolds after they come back from sampling. And we have used simple green for decontamination as well. But we're still working through the processes of how to decon as well. That's what you're talking about, decontamination of the sample manifolds? Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Hi. I had my house tested in January, and it did not test for methylene chloride, so that supports your theory. And I was part of the 2-week sample. So we have to sign up again to get retested, because I didn't meet the MCLs.
I'd like you to talk to me afterwards and make sure I know exactly where you're at. How's
Okay,
that?
thanks.
Okay? Because you're in a very small group, unfortunately. You want to take the mic back to her? Or?
Got one more right there, Sammy.
Oh, go ahead.
Is this functioning? I'm Dr. Deborah Matthews, retired plant pathologist.
Can you guys all hear her?
Thank you. I'm Dr. Deborah Matthews from UC Riverside, retired plant pathologist. So I worked with viruses for a living for 30 years, specializing in detection systems. So I didn't work directly with water, but I spent 30 years detecting things in other venues. So I was one of the early testers for the 2 weeks off, although I was only off for 4 days, thank goodness. And I had just borderline above DCM levels. I was at 6.2. So I was a little concerned, read up on it, and was hoping it's just a byproduct issue. But I have been made aware that it looks like there were a few tests before you started using the sampling manifolds that did come back positive for DCMs out of some of the schools and things like that. Is that being addressed, as it wasn't directly related to the manifolds? And before I give you I'll hit all my questions here. I know I'll be on the list for retesting as the lady over here. Is there any time frame, or are we going to be given priority since we sacrifice being off for those 2 weeks as to the rest of the general population? And I noticed in my neighborhood they were doing some hosing over this week from my port up the street, and they disconnected those today. Is that still a plan, or you're going to actually be off for all the people that are going to be tested? You're going to be off for the 5 days, or are you still planning to hose over for irrigation especially? Thank you.
Okay, so I'll take them one at a time. What was the first question? So yeah, what I tried to say as clear as I could in the presentation, the sample manifolds aren't the reason why every DCM hit is there. We suspect that there's a big group of them that are just because of the sample manifolds, but there are others that may be of other reasons, and we have to look at each one of those on a case-by-case basis. So yes, there have been tests from, I I think you're referring to some internal plumbing testing that was done where there were some detections, and I don't have an answer for where they're coming from. I think in that grouping of 59 or 60 standing structures where we saw nothing other than DCM, I suspect that many of those will test with non-detect for DCM when we go through and do it with a different methodology. Your question about prioritization is a very good one, and I don't have an answer for you, but we will talk about that as a group and take the issues of fairness and into account with the prioritization. Last question. Hosing over. Yeah, so we have a limited ability to hose over as well in terms of it takes a lot more manpower and equipment to do that. And I think our approach going forward will be both. So if we can have people that can be off for 5 days and then some we can hose over, we can do as much as we can. And as we get through August and into September and October, obviously the shutdowns are going to be less problematic for people with their landscaping. Yeah.
Yeah, hello. I have a burned structure. My home burned down, and I'm buying another standing home, and the water was just tested in escrow, and it cleared. It was clean water. But what I'm worried about is, what are the chances of it being contaminated at a later date? If it's cleared now, should it be tested again down the road? Should I do that? Or is it if it's clean now, it's going to stay clean?
So I'm going to answer that not exactly directly, because I don't think anyone can say if it's clean now, it's going to be clean forever. But I can say that we are going to be continually testing the distribution system to see if there's any changes in the distribution system. And if there are, you all will be the first to know immediately. So that's our approach, is to be vigilant. And each individual is going to have their own sort of approach in their own house about how often they want to test to be vigilant on in terms of their own water.
Okay, as far as the testing now, I realize that down the road nobody can guarantee that. I understand that, but I'm just saying from the campfire, from the residuals and the foul contamination from the campfire, if it's not contaminating my water now, the source of the water, where it comes from along that line goes a long ways.
Yeah.
So I'm just, how often do you think that we should have our water tested when we're living in our home?
That's a great question. So as far as the contamination in the source water, we have never seen any of these VOCs in the source water to the water treatment plant. We have never seen them produced at the water treatment plant. Right now, we are 97% of the time not seeing them in the distribution system above the regulatory limits. And then we're going to continually test that, like I said, monthly, then quarterly, and then annually in the distribution system.
But individually, from a personal perspective, an individual perspective, from our line 2 where you deliver it, how often should we ourselves be concerned about having our water tested to make sure that it's clear, because it's coming from such a long distance, and then it gets smaller and smaller, of course, and then it gets to our house. But to be sure, how often do you recommend an individual home be tested?
So there are some recommendations that DDW has put forward about testing individual homes. I would say that each person has their own approach to what will make them comfortable with their own water. So one person might want to test quite frequently, another person might be satisfied with one test, and I think that's a really individual
Right, but basically I'm just asking what PID would suggest, if you can suggest, what would be a reasonable time time span to test it? Do you have?
I don't want
you
to seem
can't
like I'm
say?
dodging the question, but we're really focused on the distribution system and on PIDs of facilities. And at the individual house level, that's just kind of a thing that everyone's got to decide on their own. I'm sorry.
You can't really say.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for your help.
Yeah. There is going to be some more information tonight about testing in your home that'll be presented by DDW. Maybe that'll help form your opinion on that.
Test.
So yours was tested, and when you look on that map, did you see that it has had the advisory lifted, or you haven't been able to see that yet? So if you go on the recovery website, you can find your house and click on it and see, and there are some that are on that map that the letter hasn't actually been mailed out yet, which would be there's a couple of day lag there sometimes. But if we haven't cleared location yet, we are not, we haven't sent out information to you. So let's say your place got tested, it's not on on a main line that's been cleared yet, and so then we haven't lifted the advisory at your site. However, the data from your testing is still available on the other map that's on the website with the lateral testing. And you can go there and click on your data and see the data from your site if it's been tested and the tests have come back from the labs. And if you want, I can show you how to do that, or I can check it for you right after the meeting and we can look at your place. I don't know what the... Yeah. So for the distribution system, our approach has been to stagnate the service lateral for 72 hours. I don't know the answer to that question. Yeah.
No.
Dimethyl chloride, methylene chloride rather, is it isolated by itself, or is one go with the other, with some of the other VOCs? What's your experience on that?
In the data, there is no correlation between benzene and dimethyl chloride,
Okay.
or dichloromethane, sorry.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. So this is in regards to a home that's existing. Would you recommend replacing the plastic pipes that go from the main to the house, the service pipe, as well as the flex lines? That's part of the question. And the other question is, do the filters, like the carbon filters, do they actually clean these chemicals out, like a home water filter?
So I'm going to hold on to that question and let the gentleman from DDW go through his presentation, and then maybe we come back to it at the end. So why don't we do that? We'll take a break. There'll be a chance for more questions. Not take a break. Take a break from questions. There'll be a chance for more questions after, but let's move on to the second part of the presentation, and then at the end we can ask some more, and I think that it's a good segue with that question. Okay? So, what's that? Okay. I'd like to introduce Bruce Mackler with the Division of Drinking Water. Bruce, thank you. Sammy? Yep.
I'm Bruce Mackler, and as Sammy said, I'm with the Division of Drinking Water with the State Water Board. I'm on detail, actually, from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. I'm the water program toxicologist, and I've done that for 30-some years now. So I've worked on almost all of these almost all of the drinking water regulations that we've been talking about here, and have a fair idea of what they mean to you from a public health standpoint and such. But first off, I wanted to thank Paradise Irrigation District for allowing Division of Drinking Water to be here tonight. Several of my colleagues are here, and we will be here throughout the evening and after these talks are over and the questions are over to ask or to answer any of your questions individually that you might have. And I am truly impressed by the number of people here. I think that is gratifying. I know you have a lot of questions, and I hope I can answer a few right up in what I talk about, and then further as you ask the questions. So one of the things that I think we need to cover today is we recently came out with a guidance for homeowners and residents and the consumers of drinking water. What you've heard already from Sammy, and you've heard in other talks before, is that the water utility is providing water, it's treating water and providing it through the distribution system up to the meters. But after the meter, it belongs to you. And we wanted to provide some guidance to those that were interested in what might be happening on their side of the meter after they've paid for the water. So I'll talk a little bit about that. And then I'll have a little bit of background as well, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the health implications. We have been talking about maximum contaminant levels and notification levels and the toxicity of some of these materials that are contaminants in the water. And I think you should understand kind of where regulators such as EPA and the state, how they approach protecting you with our standards. So can I have the next slide? So first off, I wanted to just give a kind of a little insight as to what the drinking water program is at the state of California. So the Water Board has the Division of Drinking Water, and it regulates all public water systems in California. That is community water systems such as PID or Del Oro, but also the non-community water systems and transient water systems like campgrounds and marinas and such like that. And what it does is it administers the Safe Drinking Water Act. There is a federal Safe Drinking Water Act, and there's a state equivalent of that. And the way we work it is that if a state chooses to have the authority to oversee the federal regulations, the federal government says, sure, you just have to be as stringent as we are about it and to take it on. And California has done that for many, many years. What the drinking water programs do are establish drinking water standards. And those are for treatment, for example. There was the question from the woman that's the virologist from Riverside, and the microbial standards are very important. We require utilities such as PID that uses surface water to filter the water and to disinfect it, to kill human pathogenic viruses and the bacteria and the protozoa so you don't get any gastrointestinal illness and such. But as well, we do these more stringent standards for the chemicals. And we're talking about benzene here and a few other things, but arsenic, for example, you've heard of hexavalent chromium, you've heard of other things in the popular press. And there are at least 100 drinking water standards out there now that are aimed at protecting you. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of that. The other thing is to comment a bit on what happens during a disaster. So at a disaster, the drinking water program at the state works with the Office of Emergency Services to try and coordinate bringing back water utilities online. The first line of defense is always going to be the utility itself, but then the Division of Drinking Water and Cal OES work together. And if matters are beyond their capacity, then the federal government comes into play, and I'll talk about that in a second. Next slide. So, one thing about emergency water, and this is also sort of a disclaimer, is the responsibility for getting you water during an emergency actually doesn't fall on the water utility. Its job is to get the system back running, and mostly its job is to help with fire suppression. And so that's the first task for any water utility. The responsibility for safe water, or for provision of water, bottled water or trucked water or whatever, first off falls upon the city. And if the city doesn't have resources, then on the county, like Butte County. And if then they don't have the resources, they'll ask the state, California, Cal OES, to find the water and get it in. And then if the state doesn't have resources, they will ask the federal government for that, for FEMA. And during my time at EPA, I worked with FEMA on this task many times, where we would get a request and we would help bring in water. So the real point is that we're all in this together. And it's sequential, but usually, such as what happened with the campfire, it becomes a coordinated effort that runs all the way up the line to the federal government and different agencies. Next slide, please. Okay, so what I wanted to do is just review the situation as we understand it now. And when I say we, I'm talking about the Division of Drinking Water. A lot of this you've heard already. I'm not proposing that this is anything new to most of you, but I do want you to understand that this is how we're looking at it. We have some thoughts on it, and we're taking it seriously. This has been a serious consideration all along. So we found benzene, the utility found benzene, and other related products following the fire. And this had first come up a year before in 2017 in Santa Rosa. I was working at FEMA at the time on the Tubbs fire response when we came to realize that there was something amiss, and that came from the citizenry. It was an individual coming back to the home and saying, "This water smells like gasoline. What's going on?" And we got on it, and benzene was what was found, and there was a group effort of the City of Santa Rosa and the Division of Drinking Water and Cal OES and EPA and FEMA to get on top of that and then to deal with it. So when the campfire happened, it was an immediate consideration that there would be a problem with benzene. Let's look. Back in November, early November, it was let's look and see what could be there. So that actually, we got involved from that time on, as you all did as well. The consideration is that that what happened is the system depressurized in certain parts of the water system, that hot gases got pulled in, and you know this personally. The high heat, the 2,000 degree smoke, and the burned materials and such. As the water system depressurized, in some places, that hot gas got pulled in. And what did it do? If there was plastic, it melted the plastic. And it did other chemical reactions. We're thinking now pyrolysis is what it's called technically. It caused the benzene to be released and other volatile organic carbon compounds. And these moved on down until they solidified or condensed and they contaminated, because most of you were out of your homes for a long time. The water system sat quiet and empty for a while, and it had plenty of time. These materials had plenty of time to soak in. But the point is that it was localized, and as Sammy has shown and you've seen before, not all homes had benzene associated with it. Not all the burned homes, nor not all the standing homes, and not all parts of the distribution system. So that's been one of the difficult ones. No one, the utility or the state or EPA could say, well, you need to do this and do it as across the board. We had to figure out what's going on. A lot is still unknown. And I hate to say that you all are the people that are at consequence from what's happening. But what we're learning from this will be helpful to others that are going to have this situation happen to them down the line. Now, one of the things is that over time, PID has done a lot of work to clean the system, and at this point, it's our belief that the water in the distribution system is clean for the most part. We know that there are some dead ends. We know that there are places where we're still finding the water, but the water in the distribution system is clean. And that is comforting to one level. Now, what does it mean for your home? We have to continue to address. The next slide, please. Okay, well, I've pretty much gone through all of this already. And I think the first line there is a consequence, because there was a question about this. There isn't any evidence that there was benzene in the system or that there were historical sources, that is tanks of benzene or something that have somehow during the fire drained back into the system. We do think that what happened was that the benzene and the other volatile organic compounds, or at least a lot of them, were generated during the fire. And so we'll be exploring that. I'll mention this later, but we're very interested in trying to come to grips with what's going on, because again, there's a lot of unknowns. Next slide, please. Now, I'm not going to talk much about the monitoring data. Sammy just went through it in exquisite detail, but we wanted to point out that the burn buildings, that we found benzene and VOCs at some points in some buildings. There's no reason to think that we wouldn't find benzene pretty much commonly as more of the burn structures were examined, particularly their lines. Of more interest, it's been the standing buildings. And I'm aware, we were chatting before this meeting, that the numbers up there aren't truly accurate. Sammy presented the more accurate numbers that he had. But some of the homes that have been tested, the standing buildings, have had detections. And I say detections, and I'll get back to that, because detections don't necessarily mean hazard from a drinking water perspective, and I'm going to talk about that. Sammy was referring to a lot of them with respect to the maximum contaminant level, the MCLs. And again, I'm going to spend some time talking about what they mean to you personally from a health standpoint, so that you're not confused as to what we're talking about here. I've also mentioned that the distribution system, it's in compliance from a regulatory standpoint, and as Sammy said, the data are showing that the water is clean with respect to the benzene and the other products that are associated with the fire. Now, there are some anomalies, and we'll talk about those. Can I have the next slide? Thanks. So these anomalies include this dichloromethane, or methylene chlorides, it's also called, but dichloromethane, and finding them. And we don't think that these are associated with the fire at all. As Sammy said, at least in most cases, it appears to be associated with the sampling. Almost all of the detections have occurred since sampling in mid-May. And then not before particularly, we found a few, but not many. And almost all of them have been since mid-May. And I think that PID is running that issue to ground. I think it's important to do that. One of the things that we at DDW will be doing will be to run that to ground, to work on that element, to see these are materials that we don't think are associated with the fire, but where'd they come from? They didn't just fly in there, and they shouldn't be there. And those two statements are important there. They shouldn't be there, and we're going to try and get on top of it. One of the things, and some of you may be familiar with that, the town of Paradise did some sampling of the town buildings, and they had found some data that indicated some contamination. None of the results that they had indicated that any of that had to do with the fire at all. But we were concerned about it, and so when they retested, we looked at the data very carefully, and when they retested, they didn't find what they had before, which again was comforting. It's comforting that some of this just might have been an artifact of monitoring, and we'll go with that and go forward. But we at DDW, as well as the utilities, will certainly be staying on top of this. There are too many oddities to just walk away and say, oh, no, that's just a lab artifact. That's not our job, and we're not planning on doing that. Can I have the next slide, please? Now, what I wanted to really do is spend a little time talking about the toxicity of benzene and the meaning of the MCL and what risk assessments are about. Because there has been some discussion here previously by other people about what constituted a health risk or what didn't. And as a toxicologist, and as having done this from a public health perspective for some time, I wanted to bring it forward. Recently, I had a long conversation with Dr. Miller, the county health officer, to discuss these kind of considerations. And I don't know if he's here tonight, but we came to an agreement on this. So the real consideration from benzene, if you don't know already, is that it has impacts on blood. It affects your body's ability to make blood cells, your white cells and your red cells. And if that impacts it, you can have anemia. And in some cases, you can get a blood cancer, leukemia, kind of a type of leukemia associated with benzene exposure. Now, these are seen, and I think you should know that these are seen typically in people that work in the industry where they breathe benzene all the time. They have a lifetime history, or at least as long as they've been employed, of breathing benzene at high levels. We also see this because benzene is common in gasoline. In California, it's 1% of your gasoline. And to the extent you might breathe gasoline fumes when you're filling your car or breathing exhaust, then you can get exposed to benzene. And if any of you are smokers, that's a major way of getting exposed to benzene. Water is actually a very small route of exposure. The 1 microgram per liter level for the drinking water standard is extremely stringent. The Safe Drinking Water Act is a mandate for the federal government, for EPA, and for the state, for the Division of Drinking Water, to do very conservative risk assessments and then set very conservative standards. So the toxicity, the way a medical person would see it, the cancers and the leukemias and things occur at much higher exposures than where we set the drinking water standard. And you see there on that risk assessment, the risk, the way we set the state maximum contaminant level, which is 1 microgram per liter, is set so that if you drink that water your entire life, 70 years or hopefully more, you drink it at that level, your risk of getting a cancer or some other disease is about 1 in a million. So that's pretty conservative. That's a tight standard. You judge for yourself whether you consider it safe or not, but it is this tight standard relative to where people actually do get sick with any amount of consequence. So I wanted to bring that up just so that you understand when PID is using a 1 microgram per liter benchmark, it's not because of compliance. They're already in compliance with that standard. It's to be protective of you all, and it is very protective. If you tested your water and it was 2, it doesn't mean that you're at a substantially higher risk on it, maybe a touch, but I just want to have that out there that these risk assessments are very conservative. The net impacts, I think, should also be brought out. Very few of you, if any, let's hope maybe not any, are drinking that water at even 1 microgram per liter. Most of you, have been not drinking that water. You may use it to garden, and I've seen people using it for gardening. You may use it for other purposes, flushing your toilets or washing your clothes or such, with no risk to you whatsoever. You're not exposed to it. You're not drinking that water. And so from that standpoint, it's comforting, at least to me, that I don't think there are many or any of you that are really at risk from this at this point. Now, the idea is that you're never going to be at risk. That's why we're trying to get the water clean. That's why PID does what it's doing, why Del Oro is doing what it's doing, and why Division of Drinking Water is doing what it's doing. So the next slide, please. Okay, so I mentioned the drinking water regulations and their stringency. I think a lot of folks don't understand that, and it was said recently publicly that the U.S. drinking water is the safest in the world. And the reason why is the Safe Drinking Water Act is the most stringent set of law on drinking water in the world. And I know that from experience on this, that we set these standards very stringently. California sets standards often more stringently than the federal government. The federal government sets the maximum contaminant level for benzene at 5 micrograms per liter versus the 1 microgram per liter. And its position is that at 5, you can drink it your whole life and you will not suffer harm. So you know, one is more stringent than 5, that's for sure. So we take this seriously. I also have up there the total trihalomethane's maximum contaminant level at 80, because some of you that are testing your water, and if you test it the way we're suggesting, you will find that these disinfection byproducts, the trihalomethanes, will be there. They're not as toxic, but they will be there, and their numbers will be big. They will be like 30 or 40 relative to the 1. And so when you look at the little printout that you get from the laboratory, you'll have some big peaks from the trihalomethanes, and then a very small one from the benzene, almost for sure. And I just wanted to bring that up, that standard is 80 in case you saw that on whatever you got. Okay. The drinking, I want to make one other comment, and this is why it's important on this guidance and what PID is doing. The regulations apply to a drinking water utility. It doesn't apply to homeowners. Congress was very explicit about saying that they would not have EPA interfere with people's lives in their homes, that these rules would apply to water utilities and to the extent the water utility had control of the water. So that's why PID goes to the meter, and then from that point on, when it's your water, it gets silent. In the Division of Drinking Water, when we have to address the regulations directly, gets silent as well. That does not mean that we want to walk away, and it doesn't mean we don't care. It just is to say that the responsibility for it falls away from the water utility and then is more on the customer. So the next slide, please. So that was what the purpose of the guidance is. It's on the Division of Drinking Water's website. You can go to, the easiest is to Google the California Water Board and the Division of Drinking Water, and then the wildfire guidance. It's easier than to try and do it any other way. That's what I do, and to get to it. And the idea was to assist the customers, you all, in what you might want to do if you were concerned with your water quality in your house, in your building, in a school or a church or wherever, when you might wonder what is going on because of all the consideration going up to your water meter. And so that's what it was written for. And the idea was to talk about occurrence and to talk about the health considerations, which I just was talking about, but also to provide some guidance on how you could get rid of the contamination if you were concerned about it, and how you could test the water and what you might do afterwards. So we tried to keep it pretty straightforward. It's not a research activity. It's for a homeowner that doesn't want to spend thousands of dollars on monitoring, but to once try and find out what she or he can on what's in the water. So next slide, please. So the first is to note that flushing is effective. A lot of water has been flushed out either by PID or Del Oro and others to flush their system. And many of you have flushed your system by watering your lawns or watering the landscape or using the water in your house to flush the toilet or whatever. If you're not drinking it, you're running the water through the system and flushing out whatever might have been in there. So that's certainly effective. The considerations for flushing, and I think you've learned this from Sammy and from others at PID, is that the benzene absorbs into plastic, polyethylene mostly, not so much into PVC. So if your house has copper pipes or galvanized pipes, it doesn't absorb into those. You can flush it out quite nicely. So it's, if you have polyethylene, PEX is a type that some homes have, but many homes here, because they've been built over many years, some have one kind of pipe, some have another kind of pipe. And if you have galvanized or copper, you're not going to have a big deal. You're not going to have a lot. Now, does that mean there's no plastic in your house? No. Your water heater will have some plastic pieces. Your dishwasher and your washing machine will, but you don't usually drink water out of the dishwasher or washing machine. But your refrigerator, if you've got one of those systems that runs cold water to the glass, If you look back there in the back like I did to mine, you can see the plastic tube. And a lot of them have filters. And so those are things you do have to look out for. If you think that there was benzene, you might have that in your refrigerator. Now, would you get a lot of it from drinking the water occasionally from that or making ice? No. But you would want to attend to that if you flushed your house. So flushing, where to flush? Look for the places where the plastic is and address that. We have it, and I'm not going to go through all the details. The document has a lot more in terms of detail. But if you flush, make sure you dump the ice out of the ice maker, maybe a couple of times. Make sure you run the water through the plastic or the system for your cold water off your washing or off your refrigerator. And those sort of things. If you have a filter on your sink, it probably has taken out benzene, but if you don't maintain that filter, it can become a liability down the line. I think most of you should know if you have those sink filters that they have to be maintained or eventually you kind of fill them up. You saturate them and then the stuff just starts coming out on you. So make sure you do your preventive maintenance on that. So we have the detail. Flush all your system for a few minutes and then you can go and sample. Can I have the next slide, please? Yeah. So on sampling, I think you've probably heard a lot of this already elsewhere, but what we recommend is that you use the EPA-approved method. That's method 524.2. That's the one that the utility has to use for compliance purposes. There are other methods that you can use, but if you use this one, then you're going to be more easily able to compare your information, what you get back from the lab, with what PID or Del Oro are getting themselves. The idea that we had in mind here was to not be elaborate in the sampling. Use some common sense. Take the faucet that you use the most. Take the faucet that you make your coffee in the morning. Let the water sit overnight, get the sample before you make your coffee, and use that. There's been some discussion about how long the water should sit. Some people have said just take the sample. Some have said let it sit overnight, 8 hours. There are some that are saying 16, some say 72. They're all right. I mean, the reality here is that if you let it go longer, you might find more. But we're not terribly concerned with the more. We're much more concerned with you finding it at all. If you find benzene in your water, in your house, after you know that the water coming in from the street is clean, that tells you something. And for me, I think the follow-up is flush the house again and take another sample. Make sure it wasn't something gone wrong in the sampling. Can I have the next slide? Flush again, take another sample. You don't really want benzene in your house. I mean, it's not likely you're going to live another 70 years and drink that water at 1 microgram per liter that whole time. But it ought not to be there. And you owe it to yourself, maybe your kids, your grandkids, or whatever, to figure out why. It's clean coming to your house, and then it's no longer clean. You may have something. Now, I don't think you're going to find that very often, but some people might. And I think it would be a good thing just to go and figure out why and then go forward on that. So that's really what the guidance document's about, is to just kind of give you some sense of that. Next slide, please. So I want to just finalize this was to say with where we're at, Division of Drinking Water and the drinking water people that are helping you. We are now looking at the data. We're looking at the data specifically from the standing homes. And we're looking very much at those anomalies, that the dichloromethane. Where'd that come from? That is not something that obviously came from the fire. It's not a normal disinfection byproduct that we would see. Maybe it's all an artifact of the sampling apparatus, but we don't think so. There's something else going on. And we're going to be involved in trying to figure out what's going on, or maybe different things going on. So we may get involved in some monitoring ourselves and testing on that. I think we're going to probably provide a little bit more guidance. We put it out there as a statewide guidance for others besides you all. And, you know, you put it out there, version 1, and we've gotten feedback, and we'll come out with a version 2. And then what we also want to do is start getting some research going. I mentioned going in that we had an interest in, well, why did this happen to begin with? This was very strange back when in Santa Rosa, the comment from the Division of Drinking Water person at that time was, we've never seen this before. And then long silence, well, we had never looked because nobody had ever brought it up. And maybe it's happened before, but we sure don't want it to happen again. We'd like to get on top of this, so we're going to do some work on that. And then premise plumbing. There isn't a big opportunity to find out more about how to clean homes from not just this contamination, but other kinds of contamination. So we'll get on top of both of those things in the near future. Next slide. So, Reese Crenshaw is the district engineer from the Division of Drinking Water that handles Butte County. And he's been involved, he's not here today, but he's been involved in that. And he's really your first point of contact. I put myself up there because if you have questions on the health side, I want you to be able to have somebody to ask. And I'll stay around and give you my card and everything afterwards if you have those considerations. And then if you have further questions about the health side of things, I would say the Centers for Disease Control, the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, the ASTDR up there, they have a very nice write-up on what benzene is and what benzene does to people. And it's in very, very user-friendly language. It's in the language that your doctor might tell you. So it's not in a lot of research-grade language, and you might be able to make some headway with it. So with that, I'm going to just leave it and take questions, and Sammy and I think the others are going to take questions as well. So thank you.
Yeah, so if anybody has questions, we have 2 mics here. We'll open it up right now to both presentations for any questions. Yep, go ahead and walk up to the mic, and we'll go one to the next.
Thank you for the presentation. I just want to know, my house is burned down. We're going to waiting to get it cleared. It still hasn't cleared yet, but we will. We're going to get a manufactured home. We're all ready to go. We got the financing, everything. We're going to move up there as soon as we can on our motorhome. Will I be able to get my water turned on, say in a month from now or 3 weeks from now? I don't care if it's potable, just so we can use the water for the sewer, septic.
Sure.
And will I be able to, what will it cost me to do that?
Yeah, so you need to come into the office or call the office and ask for an interim water supply. And you want to do it now because we are booked out about a month and a half out. So it actually
I don't need a permit or nothing?
Say that again.
I don't need a building permit yet?
Nope, no.
Just that's coming.
Yep. So, but you do have to buy a backflow device. So I believe it's $571.
1 inch is $546.76, and I'm going to get specific on the 1.5 inch and the 2, but it's about $850 for the 1.5 and about $950 for the 2.
And we'll come out.
Parcels require 1.
What's the difference? 1 and 2.
Size of your service. Most parcels will be a 1 inch.
I want to make sure we can use the water when we move the motorhome on.
Yep.
And then, of course, it'll be ready then again for the house when it's put in, right?
Correct.
I can just go down there tomorrow and
Yep. Come on in.
go pay for it?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
This mic's open too.
This is a question I've been wanting to ask and never really knew where to plant it. Or a code upgrade, and some people don't have that coverage on their policies. Sprinklers, is that a problem for you with potential what do you call that, discharge, when you have a mass event like this and you're just bleeding water all over the system without any benefit. Do we really need sprinklers? What's your position on this? Can you help us figure this out?
So the requirement for residential fire sprinklers is a building code requirement, and so it doesn't, I guess it's a requirement, so it's not an opinion thing, right? It's the state building code requirement. And the distribution system can accommodate residential fire sprinklers and will accommodate them as the rebuild occurs. Does that answer your question, or is there more to it?
Well, it just seemed to me that that was a potential point for discharge, and with the increased expense, I don't know how many lives it actually saves. You're looking at several $1,000s people might not be covered for in their building upgrades. So I was just wondering how much benefit there really is for that. And
Yeah,
the risk
I guess
that it has to you with the water system.
At some level, the building code officials have decided that it is a benefit to have, and so it's a requirement. It's not necessarily something that we could have an opinion on and decide isn't worth it.
Okay, I'm just putting it out there.
So, sorry.
Hi. I had a follow-up question on the activated carbon filtration systems. Culligan's has them, Earl's has them. They basically say they work. So I'm curious specifically, why are we not trusting, if trust is even the right word? Why are we not trusting an activated carbon filter to filter benzene or other, which is a hydrocarbon?
So in what way
do
you mean we're not trusting?
Well, my sense is that PID has not been real forthcoming in saying these systems work. If you want to spend the money, contact your insurance company and go for it. Am I right?
As far as customer side treatment?
Yeah.
So I think PID has been reluctant to issue guidance on customer side treatment for benzene removal simply because we don't know all of the details of the system you're selecting, the size of the system, the type of carbon. There's a lot of different parts that play into that. And I think we've said before, there certainly are carbon filtration systems that do a very effective job of VOC removal. That is tried and true technology that's been used in a lot of locations. However, it does have to be applied correctly, and you have to have confidence that the system that you're purchasing is appropriate for the flow that you have and for the levels of benzene that might be in the water. So it's hard to issue sort of a blanket endorsement, but I think we've tried to be clear that that is a technology that is established for VOC removal. It's just on a case-by-case basis. You have to make an assessment. Bruce, you wanted to add something to that?
No, I just basically wanted to say that that's so. Granular activated carbon, the carbon type filters, those are considered best available technology for removal of benzene and volatile organic carbon compounds. Mm-hmm. So there are utilities in the Central Valley and in Southern California that have gigantic tanks of that stuff. But for a homeowner that would be concerned, you could use that as a faucet type filter. Again, as Sammy said, you'd need to have it specified out. You'll have to find a plumber or a vendor that will tell you what you need and maintain it carefully. Mm-hmm. You have to change out the cartridge before it breaks through. Right. You saturate it. But it certainly would work. You know, if you're just using it, it's like the Brita filters. If you use it and you only drink that, that's fine. There are always some caveats, that it also takes out the chlorine. So a Brita filter, one of those kind of things, you have to use the water fast. Because you get your finger in there, you'll get it contaminated, and then you're going to have viruses and bacteria and other things, and that won't be safe. So you have to be careful on that. Okay. But
yeah, a lot of the concerns about specs, if you talk to we've had bids from Culligan's and Earl's. They supply the specs, and they seem to be geared for, this is your house, and PID's flow rate that comes into our house. So I guess bottom line is I have a little more confidence in them after talking to you. But that's basically what I'm looking for. It's just more feedback to get everybody on the same page.
Thank you.
Right,
appreciate
thanks.
it may have been addressed already, but I just want to clarify, excuse me, that at the time a permit is taken out, is that the time that the service lateral will be tested?
At the time the permit is issued.
Issued, okay.
Issued, right, not applied for, but issued.
Okay, all right, thank you.
So my home's still standing, and I've been using the water for a while, and it seems fine. The only issue that I can see is that now I'm trying to get my irrigation system back up and running. Doesn't seem like I've got quite either, I don't know if it's the volume of the water or the pressure to run the same number of sprinklers that I had before, which I know seems like a pretty minor problem, but just, you know.
Come let me know where you live afterwards so we can look into it. If there's different pressures in different parts of the system, that could be because of various reasons, and it would just be a address by address thing. So if you're experiencing some different pressures than before, it would certainly be good knowing.
We did have a freeze cover over our backflow device that did burn. And so I'm just kind of going, well, maybe, I don't know. Okay, thanks.
Hold on, Mr. Ladrine.
We're still troubleshooting pressure problems.
Use the mic.
We're still troubleshooting pressure problems, so if you come to our office or call our office and give your information, we'll put it on a service order. And I'm not going to promise you that we'll do it tomorrow, but we will get out there and help you with that. Backflow could certainly be one of those things. We've seen some issues with that. There could be some other obstructions. If you're noticing something, you're quite used to the pressure or the flow that you had, and you're recognizing that, we can try to help you to a certain point anyway, troubleshoot that.
Little.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Hello, gentlemen. Thank you very much for being here. My house burned to the ground, and I just would like to learn a little bit. We have the water mains. Are the laterals the one that goes down to the street to our home?
Correct. The service lateral goes from the main to your home.
And then
Main to the meter.
to the meter. Were all the meters shut off? And my reason to ask that question, if we're gravity fed, I understand, and I'm lower down the system, and you make the water clean for me, and my next door neighbor has not done anything to theirs, is there a chance that that water can come back to me? Or is it stopped at their home if the meter's still on or off?
So we talked a little bit about this in the last presentation back in May, about if you're using water and your neighbor is a burned lot that has a potentially contaminated service lateral, because we haven't tested it yet, so we don't know. There's so far a 30% chance it's above the MCL for benzene or something similar. And the physics and the chemistry of the situation are that as long as that main remains pressurized, that the water being delivered to your service lateral will continue to be clean. If that main gets depressurized for some reason, like a leak or is shut down for construction or something like that, then there's a potential that it could draw water in from those adjacent laterals. And that's why we have a protocol to retest anytime that happens. So at this point, that is held true with the data that we've seen, that we've sampled a lot of mains that serve burned structures, and we have a lot of clean main results, even though we know that a percentage of those laterals that serve those structures are contaminated. And so we have some confidence in that statement that if you have a burned lot, there's a clean main in the street, we replace the service lateral to your meter, that you'll be getting clean water at that meter regardless of the condition of your neighbor. We will continue to make sure that the data supports that as we go forward, but that's where we are right now with the information we have.
Well, I thank you very much, and I have confidence in you guys. I heard him talking about the filter system. I'm in construction. I just want you guys to deliver water to my house, and I think that gentleman that asked the same question, that should be first and foremost, that you guys have cleared it for us. And then if we need to go beyond that, if we're cautious, and do what you have to do. But I appreciate you guys bringing the clean water to our home.
Thank you. Thanks for your comments.
Yes, I have an unburned business in town, and I've had my water tested 3 times by an independent lab. We keep getting contaminant of tetrahydrofuran. Can you talk to that at all? I've asked a couple times, and nobody can come up with any answers for that particular contaminant.
No, but I'll look into it. Tetrahydrofuran.
Tetrahydrofuran.
We'll look into it.
Should I send you the info?
How about talk to me after and I'll get your info.
I just had one more question about the filtering. Someone said ask a question about the carbonated filtering. Is there any filter that can cut out all of these contaminants that is available for an individual homeowner?
So what they asked about is called granular activated carbon.
Granular activated carbon.
Or you could just say a carbon filter is sometimes how it's referred to.
And that filters out all these problematic, these scary...
There are carbon filters which can effectively filter out volatile organic compounds like benzene and meths.
That's wonderful news. Thank you.
Thank you.
Got a question. The backflow preventers that PID is insisting upon, you're insisting upon your building them, PID building them. What is wrong with the ones on the market? Because there's a lot of manufacturers of backflow preventers. They're nothing unusual. They've been used them in a lot of places. So online, we can get one, say, for less than $150. And you folks want $500 or $600 plus installation. I'm kind of at a loss. So if you were saying that the people who make them, let's say, I don't know a manufacturer name, they aren't doing it right, and you are?
So I think that we need to look at apple for apple when we're talking about backflow preventers.
Okay.
The backflow preventer that we're using is a reduced pressure principle backflow preventer, lead-free, meets all state requirements. And I don't think, honestly, that you could find them for less than $250 for a 1-inch anywhere. So we do just strictly at PID labor, equipment, material, and overhead when we estimate job costs.
Mm-hmm.
And so we are on a very, very tight estimate on building and installing these. It includes the testing, which is a $40 fee. There's about $50 of other parts in there to get to that point, and then the labor to connect that. So it's the actual cost to install those particular assemblies.
I've worked around industry carbon plant for almost 15 years and seen a lot of backflow preventers and stuff like that. And that's where you have looked for the industrial catalogs where I've worked, and you see obviously hardware, and why are they non-compliant? They would have to state that they were, say, lead, had lead components, which most of them aren't going to have for drinking water. So I'm just really at a loss to see why you had yours can be the only system and the rest of something bought out of a catalog doesn't comply. I suspect a lot of them do. And I can't give you a brand name like I say, so that's my question there. And I'm concerned that we're paying $500 for a backflow preventer that can be had for $200 less.
So,
and you're saying that it has to be lead-free. I don't think too many water systems or water system backflow preventers will have lead in them because it's a known consequence.
It's low lead or no lead, and
That's
it meets
correct.
a specific state requirement.
Yes.
And what we're talking about in the cost is the entire cost plus the labor to install and test. So it's not just for the backflow assembly itself.
Right, because the backflow preventer could be, as Downlink says, less than 200, and installation could be at but the homeowner, right?
If
Because
you
it's
could
past the
find a
cutoff.
backflow preventer, a Wilkins 975 XL2, for the cost you're talking,
Yes. I will do that. Okay. Second question, on the cause of the benzene and such, you're saying it's not the PVC, it's the HDPE, the PEX lines. So if this is an issue here and now, is there anything being done in the industry to make sure this doesn't happen someplace else? Are we rebuilding our homes here, should we say no HDPE in our homes or no PVC? Should it all be copper galvanized? Galvanized, we know, corrodes and blocks rather quickly. So what would you recommend? Is there an industry change coming about? If these, well, whoever would be the one to be addressed, you seem to be the one that was speaking towards the HDPE PVC issue. Do you see where a lot of people here are going to be rebuilding their houses?
Yeah,
What kind of
sure.
plumbing do you want, or pipes should be put in? Should there be no PEX used? That's a trade name.
It's an interesting question that I don't think some of us have, any of us, and when I say us, I'm talking about the professional drinking water community, not like EPA or the water board or such, or the consultants in the world or the manufacturers. This stuff, the situation is new enough that we don't really have the answers. Now, typically you don't have volatile organic compounds in the distribution system except for the disinfection byproducts. And we don't consider those to be toxic enough to be of consequence. We regulate them so you don't get too much, but in general, not so much.
Would you have it
Some
in your
of
house?
this is new. I mean, I think we're going to be taking a look at the polyethylene pipe and thinking about it. I don't know, and I don't have an answer. I'm not going to hazard a guess, but it's something to be thinking about now.
Obviously, if we're having a problem with it, we're wondering, should we have it in the house when we build a house? Because if we have a single house event that heats up the wall, heats up the pipes, which is a single house fire.
I honestly don't know what to say on that one, because I don't know.
Because there was
I'm not an expert in PVC.
Because there was a question, I think, 20 or 30 years ago,
polyethylene.
when this stuff was brought about into the industry, chasing away from copper and going to PVC. Well, that also, if that's right. Well,
I must say, though, there are National Sanitation Foundation standards that apply to the materials used in drinking water systems. And a manufacturer that wants to bring something to market has to get it certified through NSF or through ANSI. There's the testing organizations, and there are criteria. There are criteria there that deal with solvents and the absorption by these materials with solvents. These are approved materials by NSF and ANSI at this point. They couldn't use those otherwise, and you wouldn't be able to use it in your house otherwise because you wouldn't get your permit signed.
Well, if it was permitted and it was tested safe, then why do we have the problem?
Well, that's the question. Have we missed something here? And that's for the future. I don't know if somebody else has some thoughts on this.
My question is basically for someone in PID. Several months ago, I lost my whole entire mobile home. I'm trying to get another mobile home on ground, not in a park. I was told to pay $123, which I did. They said they'd contact me in 2 weeks. That was 2 months ago. I don't know what that was. I think it's something to do with getting the mobile home. Is that a flush at the meter? I mean, I paid the $123 at PID's office.
Was it maybe 132.9?
I'm sorry, it could have very well been.
Probably for a fire.
Okay. Sure. And the other question is that at the meter? And
yes.
then you're saying I'm responsible from the meter to my house if nothing's there? They have to dig it up and see if the pipes are there?
Correct. So the residential fire flow test applies to stick-built homes. All residential, traditionally framed homes require fire sprinkler systems. And so we provide a service to give the fire sprinkler designer pressure and flow information at the meter service connection so that he or she can design the proper fire sprinkler system for your house. Manufactured homes are a different animal when it comes to that because you may or may not be required to have a fire sprinkler system.
You're not.
And if you're not, then you do not need the residential fire flow test.
But they're the ones that told me to come to you to get it.
Yes. So then we need to follow up on that and find out why they're sending you to us, because it may be that you are not meeting the hydrant locations and hydrant flow requirements that the town holds. If you don't meet those, then they need you to have a fire sprinkler system. But if they're telling you that you don't need to, we really need to look into that because there's a mixed message there.
So do I call the mobile home place first and ask what, and then call you guys? Or?
Why don't you call that young lady right there? Her name is Kaylin, and she's at our office. Ask for Kaylin. She's going to take your information down, and we're going to look into that for you.
Okay,
Okay?
thank you.
Hi, my question is for Bruce, please. Bruce, thank you for talking to us about the drinking water health concerns, but I was wondering if you could talk a little bit on like off-gassing and also like contamination through skin, like showering and washing hands. And also I have a specific question. Okay, so when we had our home cleaned, the cleaners didn't follow our instructions to not use the water, and they were supposed to bring their own water in, and they cleaned our mattresses because everything smelled of smoke, and they cleaned the carpets. They hooked it up to our hose, and then they heated it within their truck. And now I don't know if it can off-gas later, like if the sun hits the carpet, can it off-gas at a later time? So questions, do I replace my mattress because I'll be sleeping on it for many years?
The easy answer is no. That's a good question, though, from two ways. One is the benzene in the water or any of the other volatiles are volatile, and they'll evaporate off. And so if they use it to wash your carpets or your mattress or something, and it's dry now, they've all evaporated and blown away. And they're not going to be concentrated enough to give you any harm. So there's that part. That's the good part. Okay. With respect to showering, yeah, if there was an appreciable amount of benzene or other volatiles, when you shower, they will come out and you will breathe them. You only get a little bit. Obviously, you don't shower lots and lots and lots all the time, every day or something.
I love long, hot showers.
Yeah, okay, I understand, and my daughter does that too. But you will get some. I should say that when we wrote the benzene maximum contaminant level, when we developed that regulation, we figured how much people would drink versus how much they'd get from showers. Because benzene and the other VOCs, we know that people they'll come out when you shower because the water is volatilizing and vaporizing and you're breathing it. So we actually fitted that in to the calculations for the risks. So I think the answer is you can take your shower if it's at a safe level at the 1 MCL, 1 microgram per liter MCL, or in that ballpark. Below the 5 for the federal, if you want to look at the federal side of it, and be perfectly okay. Because we've already accounted for that amount of exposure to trying to figure out your risk down the line.
So it doesn't actually get into your skin then? It doesn't absorb in your skin? It's just about the vapor?
Not so much. Actually, the VOCs can go through your skin a little, but in shower water, it's mostly evaporated. It's going into the air. So if you put benzene on your skin, and then they took blood sample and tested it down the line, yeah, you probably find some benzene. But you're not getting concentrated stuff like that. It's dilute. It's part per billion. That's not much, and so it isn't. So it's really the inhalation side. It's not the skin side that we worry about, and then the drinking.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Our home was destroyed in a fire, and I had a PVC pipe for the water line, and I know a plastic pipe I used for a faucet melted down into it, so I was planning on replacing the line. Are you guys going to pay for that?
So PID's system ends at the meters.
Okay.
Everything on the customer side of the meter is.
Because I did hear you say you're going to replace the laterals.
That's between the main line and the meter.
Ah, okay. Thank you.
The other side is the customer service line.
It's worth a try.
Go ahead.
Okay, so just to get a point of clarification, we're planning on rebuilding. our building permit goes to the town of Paradise, they approve it, they notify you. At that point, you guys go, okay, we need to hook up the water service at such and such address to the meter, correct?
Correct.
So at that point, I've not requested an interim water service, no charge to me, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, you guys come out on the day that you decide to hook up our service from the lateral to the meter, you put in the meter, no charge? Or is there an additional charge for that backflow fee, for that backflow?
No matter what.
So why am I paying $40 every 2 months if you guys are gonna sock me for $500 when I do decide to get hooked back up? Is this a question I need to bring to the
Go ahead.
district?
Do you want to answer this? So what you're really paying is the service fee.
Right.
Right, and the service fee isn't just for the meter, right? It's maybe a little bit of a misnomer there. The service fee of 21 and change
Right.
that you pay right now is the sealed fee. And if you're paying an active rate, it's double that.
Okay.
Right, so if your water is potable, you'll be paying the active rate of $42 and change per month. But that service fee covers the treatment plant, the source of supply, the labor, the maintenance, the repairs of mains, and everything associated with bringing water to your parcel.
Okay. But when that was explained to us, that was explained that it was also kind of like a holding place, so that when we did decide to rebuild, if we did, that there wouldn't be a huge charge to get hooked back up to.
So we're talking about keeping in a sealed status versus permanently disconnecting.
Right.
And I think that we're still probably going to be talking about that. Our board will probably still be making some decisions on what that looks like.
Okay.
As we move forward. So the fee that you're paying right now, absolutely. You put your building permit in, you get that process going right there. We still need the backflow in place.
Right.
And so that you're aware, we really are working with FEMA and trying hard to get them to reimburse the cost of the placement of the backflow assembly.
Okay.
So when that does happen, we're confident, right?
Right.
That will come back to the customer.
Okay.
Okay, and it will become a part of our permanent service connection, so we'll have a meter and backflow standard for that service connection.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
Yep.
Hi, I live up Pinch Road, and my house is standing, but I have a house on my cul-de-sac that's burned down, but because this is concerning the flushing of the lines, and you can't really flush with this house destroyed above me, because the water line goes right through his area. So am I, when will, let's see, how do I put this? When will this occur, this flushing? Or when am I going to be notified about this?
Maybe we could sit down and look at exactly what you've got going on in terms of how your house is fed, because I'm not 100%.
Yeah, it's off of Pinch Road, and it's a cul-de-sac, and goes through one house that's burned down, and at the end of the cul-de-sac is my house, and it's not burned down.
Yeah.
But when you said you're going to flush the lines, I need to know how you're going to flush the lines with the destroyed structure in front of mine.
So the line that we would flush is the main line that goes down the cul-de-sac? So
Yes.
their service lateral wouldn't be a part of that flushing? We'd flush the main line to either a blow-off or a hydrant at the end of that pipe?
Yeah, there's no connection. I cannot, if you guys flush it, you're going to get this contamination from the first house.
I'll have my computer here, I've got the internet, let's look at it after, if you don't
Okay.
mind. Thanks. Go ahead.
So I think my question is for Dr. Mackler. I believe at previous meetings, we heard that benzene or other contaminants could embed themselves in porous materials like plastic pipes and such, and that flushing doesn't get it out. Now I'm hearing that flushing may be an adequate method. So do you have a comments on that? My concern is if there's a contamination from another source due to depressurization and whatnot, and you have plastic pipes, will they become contaminated and remain contaminated? Is the flushing enough? Does that make sense?
Well, the easiest answer is kind of, I hope it doesn't sound flip. What goes in must come out, and in fact, that's how it goes. The benzene can dissolve into the plastic, get absorbed, and then desorb too. And it will. It just will. If you let it sit there in just on the air, on the ground here, eventually it'll all go away. And while some of that's very specific to the concentration in the material itself, the density of the material, and people work really hard on trying to figure all that out, the simple answer is yes, it'll come out. And the notion that it goes in permanently and stays there permanently is not accurate. I heard that too, and I went and called around to make sure that we did understand that. And they were saying, where'd that come from? So
okay.
I hope that answers it.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I have two very simple, basic questions. Based on your 40 to 50 standing houses a week, what kind of a time frame are we talking about to get all of the standing houses completed, particularly Lower Paradise, because we're going to be last? The second question was on the reverse flow. We went in and paid just recently for the reverse flow, and we're told that it was going to be a time frame, which is fine with us, but that it was going to be temporary, and then we'd have to have a second one. Is there a plan to refine that process so we don't have to go through another shut-off to get the permanent one in? Thank you.
So as far as the overall time frame goes, obviously it's a matter of resources and how quickly we can go through the entire system. At 30 to 40 per week, there's 1,200 structures we haven't tested yet, so we can do the math and sort out the time frames. It's along the lines of a year. There are also other demands on those resources, which include interim water, like you talked about. And so it's all kind of a balance, and I think we're just diligently working through it in terms of time frames. As far as the backflow preventer that's provided as interim water potentially being integrated into the permanent service once a location has been tested and then is going to be returned to service to the meter. That is being discussed, and we are working towards doing those sort of efficiencies where we're not doing something twice. So it's a point well taken, and it is part of what's happening. Yep.
I have a couple of questions. First, I just wanted to clarify. Did you say that 30% basically of the homes that burned are having the pipes, the lateral service pipes are testing for benzene, and that you're choosing that middle plan of replacing all of those pipes, and that would take 3 years or so to do?
So yes, approximately 30% of the burned the laterals that serve burned lots have been testing above the MCL for some VOC, including benzene. Right now, our preferred approach is to replace all of the laterals which serve burned lots. And the time frame that we are proposing is as it's needed to support the rebuild. Mm-hmm. So as people have approved building permits, then we would replace those service laterals so that essentially it's on an as-needed basis, and we can react to the needs of the community in terms of rebuilding.
Okay, my other question is, our home burned down, but we had a brand new swimming pool that we'd not gotten to swim in. It was our last day doing chemicals. So we're trying to maintain the pool. We don't think any damage was done to the pool, but I'm thinking a couple of things. And I don't know if there are any PVC pipes that are embedded in concrete for the water supply. I know there were ones under the ground to go from the pump to the pool, which of course they probably all burned. So my one question was, I signed up for interim water service and I paid the $546 fee, but they told me they wouldn't swim in that water when I got it. So I'm thinking now, so why did I sign up for interim water service if they're recommending, what else would I do with that water until I rebuild? We're not having a motorhome there right now. We might do that or something, but we don't have a motorhome there or anything. Does it make any sense to have interim water service? I mean, our thought was the water level's going down in the pool, and so we want to keep the water up.
I know that some people are using interim water for irrigation, and they're using it to support the reconstruction of the home on their site as well.
So would it get into the pool then, or
So
if we put that water
at the
in
time that you have an interim water supply provided, we don't know whether the water meets regulations or doesn't meet regulations. So the recommendation is it's non-potable water, and you shouldn't use it for potable needs. So until we test it, it's difficult to say, whether it's clean or not. And so, we take the approach of saying, it's not ready for use for potable needs. Bruce, you had another comment?
I didn't quite understand. Are you planning on drinking that water from the pool?
No, just we want to maintain the pool and have it be in good condition. So I don't know if we're going to actually drain it at this point. I mean, our thought was that we would drain it and put the new water in and have it maintained with chemicals. But if it's got the benzene in it and they were told not to swim in it,
Benzene will go away.
it will go away.
Oh yeah, it'll volatilize. So
Okay.
you have a pool and it's got water in it. Are you keeping it chlorinated?
We're putting in chlorine and muriatic acid every week.
Okay, so it's stable that way. So you can make sure the microorganisms are gone. And when did you fill it? It's still filled from before the fire?
It was filled several weeks before the fire. We were just brushing the inside of it. It was the last day we had to brush the inside of it.
And you've run the filter and it's clean? It
No.
looks clean?
No, the filter burned in the fire. So we can't hook
Oh,
up
I thought you had said you'd replace it.
No, we can't hook up the filter until we get electricity, which we can't do till the debris is removed, which was my other question. They didn't ask me that when I signed up for the temporary water. Do I have to have the debris removed before I can get the interim water? No, okay.
Well,
So
I don't know
I'm
about
good there, all right, because I
that
am on the
aspect.
list.
I was just thinking about the safety of the water, if
Right.
you want to go swim in it or use it for something.
No, we just wanted, it'd just be nice to have it look.
You don't have a filter? Is it getting pumped or you just dump the
We're
chlorine
just dumping it and
store it around?
swirling it around right now to try to maintain it, and it's
Yeah,
cleared up
okay,
a little
okay.
bit.
Okay, it's time to go buy a new filter on that. But the water itself probably is going to be fine. And once you filter it and you keep the chlorine up, if it doesn't turn green with algae, the benzene is going to evaporate and all the disinfection byproducts go away and such. And,
Well, we will buy a filter, but you can't use the filter until you have electricity, which
Yeah,
we
well,
can't do
of
till we
course.
do the other things, so.
all right, okay.
Okay. And so, I don't know, and maybe I have to ask my pool guy if there are any PVC pipes or involved that could get infected by putting that water in there if it has benzene in it.
Say that one more time.
I don't know if there are any PVC pipes that would be embedded in the sidewalk or something that they would hook up to when they do a new filter for us. If old PVC pipes are in that concrete and the water comes through there that has benzene in it, could that then infect those pipes and stay in them?
Yeah, what Jim just said is maybe consider testing the water to see. That would be a good start to see
Okay.
if that is a concern.
So when we get the
in
interim
terms of
water to the
contaminating
site, just take some of that water from the faucet, test it before we use it in the pool.
Right.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Hi. My house burned down, and I don't have water at my house. And I called today about the $20 having to decide how long it's going to take to rebuild and have clean water as opposed to sealing it off. And I was told that there's like a $500 charge if I turn it off and then try to get it back on for the filter. And my question is that 5 days ago, Paradise was recertified as a rural area, so we can get money now. Governor Newsom has made Paradise eligible for millions of dollars in grants, technical support to rebuild our community and our water system and our homes. And my question is, 150 million is going to go to California. Well, we're governors in California. So it's not just for Paradise, but since we were the largest buyer in Paradise, we're going to get a big chunk of that money. So my question is, you're PID, but we're PID too. Without us, there would be no PID. We're paying to support PID, and I understand you're doing a lot of work, and I'm grateful for that. So are you going to extend that money down to the homeowner for this $500 meter that I'm going to have to pay for? Because right now, paying $20 a month for a product that I don't have and I can't use, even though you're maintaining whatever you're maintaining, I don't have access to it. And so my decision is to close off my meter until it's figured out, am I going to have water when? It's such a, you can't tell me, and I understand that, but I have to figure out how long is this going to go on. And it's not just the water, it's beginning the money, the permits, and the excavation of my property with big holes in it, trees on it. So there's lots of things. So I'm just advocating for us to get some of that money that you guys are getting to support us so we can come back. We need help to get back and to rebuild. And I understand you're trying to stay afloat too. We're all in the same boat, so. But it said for houses too, so my house, it didn't specify, it said that money's gonna be for technical support, it's gonna be for water, houses, anything to rebuild our community.
Yeah, so I can answer that question. We have met, so what the census did was it did create, put us into a rural category, which opened us up to USDA funds.
Right.
Once that happened, the day it happened, we actually met with the deputy director of USDA for our area to talk about getting funds into PID. The backflow side of things in the interim water supply, the reason why we're having you pay for that at this current point is because it's a new device. It's not something that has been on your property in the past. It's something that is going to be a new requirement going forward. We are working through FEMA to make sure FEMA will reimburse us for that cost, but until we get assurance of that, right now we're still passing the cost on to the customer. When we do get assurance that FEMA will reimburse us for that, we will credit that customer's account for that exact amount that was paid to us will be paid back to you. The $21.90 some a month is to maintain the system. It is true that you can pull the meter at this point, which there really is no meters in the ground at this point. But when we come back to reinstall the meter, let's say we get down to the point where you're ready to come out and rebuild, the cost is going to be, right now it's capped at up to $500.
So it could be more than $500, you're saying?
No, it can't be more than 500,
okay.
but it could be less. So it's a personal decision on your side. If you want water on your property, though, for irrigation, for cleanup, that will cost the $21.90 some to have. And then when your service is considered potable and we are giving you potable water, then we are going to then change you over to the active rate. Unless you don't want the water, then you can go back into the sealed rate, but there will be no water on your property at that time.
Okay, my question is, when you get all this money that's coming down, it's $150 million, I don't know how much is going to be allocated for Paradise. Do you know that yet?
No, because it's a case-by-case basis. There's money there. You have to now go and get it. So we are now in the application process to try to get some of those funds into Paradise.
Okay, so when that money comes down, and it's going to be going toward the water, because that's one of the basic infrastructures that Paradise needs to survive, are you guys going to help support us, because we're part of that PID too, that we need that help for our meters. We need that help for our pipes that go into our house. It's not just, okay, it stops here, and now it's up to you, homeowner. I mean, we need help from PID.
We will talk to the deputy director about how to get money to those individual homeowners. We don't have the ability to get money to you, but the town might. There might be collaboration that we can work towards to try to find monies for you guys to help you with your rebuild and the replacement of your water system.
Or did you put that in as your application when you said that you...
This was Thursday we met.
Right.
So we haven't even applied. We're finding projects to apply for that to support the water infrastructure for PID.
So are you going to let us know how much that's going to be?
Absolutely, we'll brag about that.
Thank you.
Thank you for answering our questions. I think the evening should be over. A lot of us are tired. We need to get home. And if you got more questions, go to the board meeting.
Thank you, Ward. Just to let you know too, if you are wanting your home tested, and you can sign up, there is a sign-up table out there. See the people in the orange vest. They'll direct you to the sign-up table. Thank you very much. And to let you know, we will be continuing having these meetings. We're hopefully on a 6-week basis that we'll be back again.